The Cincinnati Bengals play 5 primetime games in 2024. Let's break down the schedule.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts, including on your drive to work, if you're so inclined to put us on your car's Bluetooth on your commute. We're going to get into the schedule today as we break down what's going on with the Bengals in 2024 and the sequencing of opponents. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. So if you're looking for tickets for any of these games we're about to talk about, you can save $20 off your first purchase with promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Terms apply. And James, as you looked at this schedule, what stood out to you first?
Well, pretty simple to me. I was looking at these holiday dates and Christmas. Well, the Bengals don't play on Christmas, but all of their AFC North opponents seem to. Their AFC North rivals do. The Chiefs do. So, by the way, raw deal for Patrick Mahomes. You win back-to-back Super Bowls. You have to leave your family on Christmas and go on the road to play the Steelers. I would be annoyed. Maybe that's some Netflix money going their way. But that stood out. And when I look at this schedule, the first thing when I saw it was, we talk about fast starts and the need for a fast start. And I know when everyone saw the Kansas City Chiefs week 2, oh man, the Bengals, they better be ready. Well, the start of this schedule, it lines up for exactly that, a fast start. I'm in here where I look at it and I see the Patriots at home. Then I see the Commanders in week 3. Monday Night Football, by the way, at home. And then you got to go deal with Bryce Young, who's as tall as me in the pocket. You feel pretty good about those first 4 games, even with the defending Super Bowl champs in week 2.
Yeah, I think that part of this is just the nature of the rotating opponents that the Bengals face. And part of this is the last place schedule. They start the year with New England. That is one of those last place games this year for the Bengals. So they get a home opener. They get a team that's either starting Jacoby Brissett or a rookie quarterback. And while they do have Kansas City and Baltimore in the first 6 games, Washington and Carolina and the New York Giants, as they get those AFC East opponents early and a couple of rookie quarterbacks and an NFC South opponent early with the Kansas City and Baltimore games. I think that that's a reasonable start to the season for this team that is looking to get out of the gates quickly. You can't have, the historic issues that some Bengals fans like to point to with rookie quarterbacks, with potentially Drake May and Jaden Daniels in the first 3 weeks of the season. But if there's a time to face those guys, would it not be in their first starts? I think so. And it's not like those are teams that have the Chicago-like foundation for their quarterbacks to step into. They've done some things. Of course, both teams have done some things in the offseason to make it more favorable for their rookie quarterbacks, but not like Chicago has with all the capital they had and all the acquisitions that they've made over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think really anything less. And as we continue to go through, you deal with the Ravens. So you have 2 really tough games in the first 6 weeks of the season, and one's at home. And if you can somehow win those games, we could be talking about that undefeated type start where you're looking at a 5-0, a 6-0 before you have to play the Browns on the road, play the Eagles, go to Baltimore a few weeks later. So it is set up. And I agree. I think Carolina's going to be working through some things. Washington, there were some rumblings that Washington would be the week 1 opponent. I'm glad it's not week 1, because if it is week 1, and I get it, it's still a rookie quarterback, but Jaden Daniels can run. And that little wrench into things is something that can catch defenses off guard, especially week 1. So yeah, you got to deal with a tough defense in New England, but you're at home. It's a good tune-up before you have to play the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think that broke their way. And really, the other thing that just really jumped out, they don't have many long road trips where you're like, oh, at Los Angeles and then at Dallas. Like, those aren't back-to-back. They're spread out. There's a bye week in between. You don't have more than 2 road games in a row. The bye's a little later, just some little observations like that, a little later than we're used to. But I think that could be good for this Bengals team. And then the other part of it is obviously the primetime element. A lot of late nights. It's going to be, you're going to be on my schedule to a degree with some of these primetime games where you're like, man, 5 o'clock instead of 10 in the morning. And so, yeah, it's going to be later for you too.
Yeah, I love those 10 in the morning starts out here on Pacific time. The Bengals primetime games, interestingly, 4 of them are not on Sunday. Talk about Sunday, NFL Sundays. You associate NFL football with Sundays. They have 2 Thursday games and 2 Monday games. The first primetime game of the season for the Bengals at home, the Washington game, Monday Night Football. The second coming a few weeks later at the New York Giants for Sunday Night Football on October 13th. Then again, 4 weeks later at Baltimore for Thursday night, 4 weeks later at Dallas for Monday night, 2 weeks later at Cleveland for Thursday night. So that does some interesting things in terms of short weeks and long weeks and where rest is, including a stretch where they will play 3 games in 11 days and a stretch where they'll play 2 games in, what was it, like 3 weeks or something like that in late November. So some interesting stretches of games where they're very dense and very light on actually playing football.
Yeah, that stood out to me for sure. Is you go to Baltimore on a short week, and then you have the mini bye, and that's November 7th, then the mini bye, and then you deal with your longest road trip, which is the Chargers game, and then you have your bye. And it's like, man, this is really nice. You have 2 games between November 7th and November 30th, the end of the month. But then it's a gauntlet where you have 4 games in 19 days, 3 games in 2 weeks, December 1st, December 9th, and December 15th, where you have to go on the road on Monday Night Football after playing the Steelers. You have to go on the road on Monday Night Football, play the Dallas Cowboys, then a short week where you have to deal with Brian Callahan and the Titans. And who knows, maybe they've figured some things out in December and are one of those up and coming type teams by then. That's probably their vision, their hope, certainly in Nashville right now. And then 4 days later, you have to deal with the Cleveland Browns, albeit at home, but on Thursday Night Football. That's a tough stretch.
This is on the Cleveland Browns note, the first in the last couple of primetime games with the Browns where it is in Cincinnati. The last couple were Monday Night Football on Halloween in Cleveland and a Thursday night game in Cleveland. They also had the Browns home and season opener in Cleveland last year. This year, the first Cleveland game doesn't come until week 7, the last one in week 16 at home for prime time there. That is the last of the very tight and dense set of games, though, like you mentioned, James, where they play on the 9th, 15th, and 19th, Dallas, at Tennessee, then back at home for Cleveland in week 16. So a tough stretch there, I think, but from a high level, the schedule doesn't look too bad. And I don't think there's a way it could have looked too bad, but the lack of really long road trips is nice. They've had 3-game road trips. They've had 3-game homestands, much more balanced from that perspective this year. The big thing that stands out to me that annoys me from a football perspective is just the short weeks. 2 Thursday games in 1 year. Is that really necessary? They both have to be AFC North games. I don't love that, but I guess it'll be interesting to see. I obviously haven't looked at every team's schedule in the entire NFL. Most teams aren't playing 2 Thursday night games. I know there's more international games, and there's that implication for teams traveling longer and stuff like that. But how many teams ended up with 2 Thursday games? This is going to be something when we have time to look at every schedule that'll be interesting to compare.
Yeah, that stood out to me. There's a lot of things that we could dive in. We could go by section of the schedule if you want to. We've hit on some of the higher end points, but Bengals primetime, 5 games, not playing in the holidays, and set up for a fast start potentially. We'll continue reacting to the Bengals 2024 schedule coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. You want to get tickets to these games? Of course you do. And that's why you got to download the Game Time app today. Not tomorrow, not the next day. Download it today, because it's not just Bengals, Patriots, or maybe you want to go on the road to one of these awesome destinations, whether it's Los Angeles and the Chargers, whether it's Monday Night Football in Dallas. Maybe you want to go to that Kansas City game because it's finally going to be warmish when the Bengals and Chiefs play at Arrowhead. Game Time is the app you need to get because you're going to save money. And yeah, you hear us talk about the last minute deals that they offer. You can get tickets ahead of time for all of your favorite sports, favorite games, whether it's NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, summer concerts, all in one place with Game Time. They have easy to find. You can buy NFL tickets for every kind of event in your area, views from all seats in the venue, and their all-in prices show exactly what you're going to get for your buck. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
I like the idea of going with quadrants or I guess trimesters. How do you do it at thirds? That's the word I'm looking for. Thirds of this Bengals schedule where you've got 18 games. We talked about the first 6 weeks, an opportunity for a fast start with on paper difficult games on the road to Kansas City, hosting Baltimore for their first AFC North contest of the year, not until week 5, which feels a little late. It's going to feel like the rest of the season after they start with 4 non-division opponents is packed. There's going to be 6 out of the final, I guess, 13 games of the season, roughly half of the final 13 games of the season against AFC North opponents. But the second set of 6 games is a fairly challenging stretch with Vegas in the middle, going to Cleveland, where the Bengals have not performed well in recent years, and hosting Philadelphia, who should be, again, a competitive football team out of the NFC, and Thursday night football at Baltimore before traveling to LA for their longest travel of the year, the farthest they're going this year, to Los Angeles in week 11. What do you think of that stretch? They do finish it with the late week 12 bye. What stands out to you there?
Yeah, I actually think that this is the hardest stretch from an opponent standpoint because at Cleveland, you mentioned it, then you welcome in Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's going to be a tough game. Even though you're at home, the Raiders sandwiched in there, dare I say, must win. And then, yes, you have rest, but Lamar Jackson and the Ravens on the road, short week. By the way, this is my least favorite game of the year. It's week 10. Last year was week 11. But of this schedule, this is the game that pisses me off the most or makes me the angriest. And it's because it's within days of the anniversary of Burrow's thumb injury in Baltimore on Thursday Night Football. And so guess what we get to see that whole week? Burrow not being able to grip the ball, Burrow trying to throw on the sideline, Burrow walking to the x-ray room, Burrow getting evaluated, Burrow standing on the sideline. Like we're going to see all of that. It's prime time. That's exactly what's going to happen. You know it. Same stadium, all of those things. And so we'll ask the question, Joe, what's it like? What's it going to be like going back to M&T Bank Stadium on Thursday Night Football? AFC North up for grabs again, all of those things. What do you remember about that? I just can feel it already, and it's annoying. So already annoyed by that one. Yeah, but that game, and then I think the Chargers are going to be better than some expect. Last year, I thought the Rams would be better than some expected, and they're better than even I thought. I think the Chargers with Harbaugh are going to feel different and be better. I'm not saying Super Bowl contender, but I don't think going there is going to be easy. And going there and winning is certainly going to be a challenge, especially a 425 matchup. A lot of eyeballs are going to be on that one. These 425 games, they might not be necessarily primetime games, but they're going to be national games and seen by a lot of the country.
Yeah, I think that the Chargers are one of the teams on this schedule where I don't feel like I have a great idea of what I expect them to be. Sure. They're one of the teams that's gone through the most change. I guess you could argue that New England and Washington as well, but with rookie quarterbacks, even with new coaches, it's hard to feel too threatened by teams that were very bad last year. And the Chargers were very bad last year, but Justin Herbert was hurt for some of that year. And it was kind of the lame duck period for their coach where it was kind of writing on the wall that coaching staff, and they had an interim coach. Did he get fired in the season? Did Staley make it through the season? I can't remember.
He did not know. I
Okay.
think he was the first coach fired. He was fired.
So they went through the interim coach. They went through the Harbaugh change. They added talent. They had a great draft pick. They got Joe Alt in the building. You should help their offensive line. That's been problematic. They restructured some of their guys. They totally overhauled their wide receiver room, by which I mean they let their good wide receivers leave. But maybe that doesn't matter with the way Jim Harbaugh wants to play football and with Justin Herbert at quarterback. So that's a team that there have been really high expectations for nationally, I think, for the
Mhm.
last several years, and they haven't really met those expectations. They've been expected to go toe to toe with the Chiefs and really compete for the AFC West, and they haven't yet. And is Harbaugh in his first year going to get them back to that spot? He's won everywhere he's been. No reason that he wouldn't do it here with the Chargers as well. When they have a good quarterback in Justin Herbert, I'm not going to debate, where Herbert ranks in the quarterback pantheon, but good quarterback. I think we can agree on that. That's one game that I really have a hard time getting a feel for at this point. And late in the season, maybe they've worked through some of their new coach things that I think, in addition to Tennessee, those are the two teams with new coaches that they play later in the year. Yeah, those are the only two teams they play with new coaches that much later in the year. I guess they'll see Vegas a couple weeks earlier, but that one is an interesting one where is that a hard game? Is that an easy game? There is a long road trip element there. That one is a little harder to peg for me right now.
Yeah, and that's why to me that stretch is so big, and I obviously that next stretch, which we'll get to, is just it's a gauntlet because of the rest or lack thereof. But overall, I look at this schedule and just the other part, especially to this point, I don't feel like any of these games I'm penciling in as that's probably a loss. Like I think the Bengals can beat the Ravens on the road. I think they would have beat them last year, and maybe not. Who knows? But they had the lead when Burrow left the game. In the Ravens are worse in a lot of areas, and we have time to discuss that. But the Eagles are an interesting one, but at least you get them at home. And who knows what the Browns are going to be? I know it's a tough matchup for the Bengals, but we don't really know at this stage. So it's interesting that week 7 through week 11, 5-week stretch before the bye. I think there's some good teams, potentially great teams, but we don't know. And a couple of those games are on the road before the bye. And if you could go into the bye with some momentum, that might be able to propel you to that last stretch of the season, which is it's a sprint, Jake, and it's going to be no rest for the weary because the Bengals are going to be tired.
Well, they do have that stretch between November 7th and December 1st where they play Baltimore on November 7th, the Chargers on November 17th, and then they have that week 12 bye. There's an opportunity to catch up on rest, despite the short week going into Baltimore to start that stretch, and then the long road trip afterwards on the mini bye where they have 10 days between Thursday night football and the subsequent game with the Chargers. There is an opportunity to catch up on some rest there if they can make it through that short week to start the season. And I guess there's also a 1-day shortened week between weeks 3 and 4 with Monday Night Football as well. But what do you make of that late bye and all of that rest the Bengals are getting? That's going to feel like a weird period for us where we're only going to be covering 2 games in a pretty long stretch of time there.
No, I think it's one. I love it because you get the mini bye going into your longest road trip, and then you get your bye coming back. And so, man, if you could win those 2, you feel really good. But for the Bengals, you're right. That's where you get your rest, where November, you have the short game against the Ravens. And then after that, it's a short week for that game against the Ravens. And then after that, it's smooth sailing where you have one more game the rest of the month. And you're like, all right, well, let's get this one done. And then you hit the gauntlet. And so you're right. That's when maybe injured guys that are on injured reserve that you're hoping to get back, they can rest up some, or guys that are nicked up playing through things can rest up some, because the December schedule, not from an opponent's perspective, even though the opponents I think are going to be tougher than some realize, but the lack of rest is there. So it kind of balances out. You almost have too much rest in November and not enough in December. But let's turn the page. Let's get to December and January coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So throw $5 on Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets if you think they're going to finish business in Game 6 and send the Timberwolves home and advance to the Western Conference Finals. Well, there you go. You wager $5. If that happens, guess what? You get $150 in bonus bets back instantly with FanDuel. And it's not just the NBA playoffs. Maybe you think that the Reds are going to start winning after their Tuesday night win over the Arizona Diamondbacks, or you think that the Boston Celtics are going to continue to roll all the way to the NBA Finals and maybe upset a team like Denver, which I do think that they would have to upset the Denver Nuggets. The point is you can wager on all of these things, from props, parlays, and so much more. Point spreads with FanDuel, and get $150 to bet on all of those things by winning that first $5 bet. Once you do, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Sign up today at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Final third of the season, James. It is a sprint, as you mentioned. When you look at it on a calendar, it really looks compact.
Yes.
You plug these dates into your Google Calendar or whatever, and you're, man, 3 games in 11 days, 9th, 15th, and 19th of December. They do avoid the holiday games, as you mentioned, but the second Thursday game, like, really? Can't we just put that on Sunday and let them have some normal rest and a couple of TBD games to finish up the schedule? But the opponents here are noteworthy. Baltimore games are done at this point, which feels like the earliest they've been done playing Baltimore for a while. And that's a feels thing. I haven't double checked this. I could be wrong about that. There could have been a late Baltimore game. But the last Baltimore game in week 10, they haven't played Pittsburgh yet at all. Their first game against Pittsburgh comes in week 13, and then they play them again to finish the season in week 18. And they've also got the Cleveland AFC North game. So 3 AFC North games out of the 6 final games to finish up the season, including that crunch time or sprint of games from week 14 to week 16.
This is where the division's going to be won or lost, most likely. And if you're the Bengals, you obviously want to be in a position to have the lead. But yeah, two games against the Steelers. We know they're not going to have 3 wins going into December. I know people will beat up on the quarterbacks or whatever. Mike Tomlin just isn't that. So these are going to be battles. And so to have a bye coming into that Pittsburgh game and you have them at home, it is nice, that element of it, because then you have an extra day of rest going to Dallas, and then it's your last road trip until that final week. But man, it's tough, because I could see scenarios where the Steelers are a 6-win team going into December, or a 5-win team going into December, and they somehow get to 8 or 9 wins by that last game of the on the schedule there in week 18, where you're going on the road and battling them, and maybe they're fighting for a playoff spot and you're fighting for the division or a playoff spot. But the Cowboys, I could see them going one way or the another too. Like, that feels like a really tough game. What if they underachieve a bit? Mike McCarthy's on the hot seat going into that game. What if that's the discussion? And I think it could be. There are scenarios. Does Cleveland underwhelm this year, or are they just really, really good? I think a lot of these teams have like semi-high to high upside, and then the floors are just really interesting. You kind of described the Chargers that way. I think the Steelers are going to be steady. We know what they are, but the Cowboys, Titans, Browns, Broncos will probably be pretty bad. But those teams are kind of a mixed bag where I'm not sure exactly what to expect. And I could see them being good, or I could see them being kind of crappy. And you're looking at that last month, or going into that last month, like, man, you can rack up some wins here.
You'll really know who these teams are at this point, unless Pittsburgh's really struggling. And this is where, like you said, they get into December and they have like 5 wins or something, and they've lost their last few, and they're like, maybe we need to make a quarterback change. And this is where Justin Fields takes over for Russell Wilson or something. And then you don't know exactly what the Steelers are, but you should know who these teams are at this point, which is mostly applicable for Tennessee, and Denver, Denver potentially starting a rookie quarterback. Tennessee should be familiar. They've got an ex-Baltimore Mike McDonald defensive coordinator, a prodigy kind of coordinator, guy who comes from that system. And you've got Brian Callahan, who obviously the Bengals should be very familiar with the concepts that the Titans are running on offense. But a couple of teams that just kind of are annoying, that aren't ever bad, that can always steal a game in Pittsburgh and on the road in Dallas for Monday Night Football. Don't love going to Jerry World for prime time, a place where the Bengals historically haven't been the most successful, let's say. And then Cleveland on Thursday night, like primetime games with the Browns. I know they've been in Cleveland, but lately those have been terribly lopsided in the Browns' favor. So some potential pitfalls here in the last 6, even though on paper, none of these are games where you're like, oh yeah, that's the hardest game on the Bengals schedule. That comes in week 2, honestly, at Kansas City. That's the hardest game on the schedule. They get it out of the way quick.
Which I don't mind. And after seeing the entire schedule, I didn't mind it in the moment. I like it. I like it because not that they would sleepwalk, but imagine if it was like New England, Washington, Carolina, and New York. Like those were the first 4. It would be real easy to stub your toe on one of those, but it's like, all right, week 1, it's week 1. You want to win and get off to the right start. And then you have the Chiefs right away to get your attention. And then Commanders, Carolina, hopefully you can handle business against both of them. And then you have Baltimore coming to town. And there's your next test where they won the division last year. We know what they're about. They're trying to win more than they did last year and finish the job in the AFC. They got close to an AFC championship. So it's a nice balance there, I think, of like potential contenders or contenders and teams that we don't expect to be in that caliber this year. Doesn't mean that the Patriots won't be good and surprise, or the Commanders or the Panthers. Who knows? But as of now, it feels like it's set up for the Bengals to start strong. And if you start strong, there's no reason why they can't take that momentum into October, into November. And then we're talking about 8-9 wins going into December. And that's what you want, is to be in that number 1 seed conversation. And I certainly think that that's what we should be talking about going into that December stretch where it is no rest for the weary.
Yeah, got to get through the off season, of course, before we really have an idea. Obviously, a lot of things can change, but on paper, yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. Just by comparison, last year they started with 2 AFC North opponents right out of the gate. This year, the first AFC North game, not until much later, not until week 5. The other thing,
that. Sign me up for that.
And it's interesting because last year they were so successful against the NFC, and they have a couple of NFC, 3 out of their first 6 games against NFC opponents. And that's kind of interesting as well. But yeah, not starting the season in the division when you're looking for a fast start should give the Bengals an opportunity to build up some confidence here. Not that that's something I think they're lacking or need to do, but they have not had fast starts. And getting into the season healthy is a big part of that. But that is a big takeaway when you look at the schedule. And then the other thing was I went and looked up the latest or earliest the Bengals have played their final game against Baltimore. And actually last year, their last game against Baltimore was just a week later, like you mentioned, when Joe Burrow was injured. And a couple of years ago, they played Baltimore for their final game in 2019 on November 10th, which is probably about the same week of the season. Bengals did lose both of those games, so hopefully they can reverse course on that one this time. Those are home and away, so no trend there, but I just wanted to check because it was a little bit of remembering the back-to-back games in 2023 to finish the season and then to start the playoffs with the Ravens. And the year before that, they played the Ravens the day after Christmas. So not terribly uncommon to finish playing the Ravens early as the schedule makers continue to rotate where the Bengals play their AFC North opponents.
Yeah, anything less than just thinking about this and putting it into context of the month. So September, it's Patriots, Chiefs, Commanders, Panthers. You got to be at least 3-1. And I know that's not – so going into that first AFC North game, You should be in the top 10 of power rankings. You should be getting some love. That should be a pretty hyped game, assuming the Ravens are who we expect them to be the first month of the season. And yeah, the division could be really up for grabs still going into December because of those December games. The good news is the Bengals, we're not going to be talking about, oh man, they're 0-3 in the division and it's October 7th, right? It won't be that simple because their second game is October 20th in the division, which is kind of wild. And third is that second Baltimore game. You surprised they play Baltimore twice before the Steelers at all? Would you rather play the Steelers early or late? Real quick before we get out of here.
I don't think I care that much.
I don't think it matters for the Steelers either. I think it matters with the Titans. I would rather play the Titans much earlier. I'm happy they're playing the Panthers early, for example. Teams like that are swing teams. The Patriots early makes sense. That's a good one to play early.
Yeah, the only team, like if you were to move a week for a team, it would be moving Tennessee earlier and Washington maybe later, because I don't really care too much about Washington. I think they're too far away. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But getting Tennessee earlier, maybe it's Kansas City later. Put them back in the traditional December spot where they've been the last few years. Yeah, especially because it's in Kansas City. But yeah, getting Tennessee earlier would be good. Getting Pittsburgh late, like Pittsburgh's going to be Pittsburgh. These teams know each other incredibly well, and there shouldn't be crazy significant changes for the things that matter in those games. Although I do know that Pittsburgh will have some differences on offense with the new quarterback, a different scheme, some different receivers, and so yeah, that one doesn't get me so much. The one that I would change is, outside of like which week he goes in, is get that Cleveland game in December out of Thursday. Like, what are we doing here? Just put that on Sunday. Give the Bengals relatively normal rest to finish out the season instead of having them play a second Thursday night game in that close proximity to the playoffs. That might be the last Thursday night game of the year. Because I don't think they do Thursday night the last 2 weeks of the year. I can't remember right now.
I think you're right. Might be. It's honestly, it's a heck of a way to stamp the Battle of Ohio. You sweep the Browns going into one last division matchup. You have the Steelers, but maybe you clinch the division that night on December 19th. Then Jake will be wooing for sure.
Thursday night division clincher in December. That sounds pretty good.
December 19th, yeah, before a pre-Christmas division clincher.
Yeah. That would mean things have gone pretty well. And honestly, I think the schedule gives them the opportunity for things to go pretty well. And of course, we'll revisit this as the season approaches.
Schedule game coming soon.
Play the schedule game, James' favorite game. Until then, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.